You are listening to Down Home. As black men, Jay and I often find ourselves asking the question, why? Why did slavery happen? Why were our ancestors treated lesser than? Why did the world let this happen for so long? These questions are fraught with emotion, and rightly so. The subjugation and oppression of an entire ethnic group is disgusting and just wrong. It's easy to attribute these horrors of slavery to sheer evil. And while that's certainly part of the story, it's not the whole picture. There's no doubt that the actions of enslavers were brutal and horrible, but attributing their motivations solely to evil is too simplistic. Through 4 seasons of the Down Home podcast, Jay and I have had many on and off podcast discussions about this. And we have concluded that the motivations of enslavers are much more nuanced than just evil intentions. While we may never know the true intentions of every enslaver, since we can't travel back in time and ask them, and nor would I want to, considering my skin tone, that might not go well, what we can do is look at the evidence. One glaring piece of evidence stands out like a shining light in a dark room, and that's money. The business of slavery was not just about subjugation, it was a meticulously constructed system designed for economic gain. There's no denying that the business of slavery was hugely profitable for the individuals, companies, and nations involved. In today's episode, we are going to talk about these nations and how slavery became a cornerstone of economic systems, driving profits. This is the first of a 3-part series where Jay and I will take a deep dive into the business of slavery. In the rest of the series, we'll be talking about far-reaching impacts of this economic exploitation, how it laid the foundations of modern capitalism and created wealth disparities that are still evident today. I'm Derek Wise, and on behalf of Jay Jones, welcome to Down Home, the Canadian experience from 2 black men.
Breaking new ground, breaking new ground, breaking new ground, simple breaking new ground, breaking new ground, breaking new ground, simple breaking new ground, breaking new ground, breaking new ground, simple breaking new ground, breaking new ground, breaking new ground.
This is an interesting subject, man. Like, we've been kind of bouncing around with this for forever, like dancing around it.
Yep.
But I think it's about time we kind of dived right into the subject matter and actually took a closer look at it. And I don't like we kind of went away and researched it on our own, and the question that I came away with was remarkably, do the Americans get a bad rap in the Atlantic slave trade, man?
Well,
You know what I mean?
that's a fair question. There's 2 sides to it. I think, let's put it this way. I don't think the British get enough of a bad rap.
Yeah.
I'm not going to say the Americans. It was a big umbrella of
Yeah.
a whole bunch of everything, which led to it. And I think every country, every nation, everybody who was involved have a big part of it. But the biggest thing, I think, with the research, of course, this deep dive is sort of the economic boom that it created.
Oh, yeah,
And
definitely.
I think because of the economic boom, maybe the human treatment and circumstances was severely overlooked.
Oh, yeah, definitely.
Now bear with me as I attempt to set aside the emotional weight of this topic and focus on raw numbers. I acknowledge that this is a task that is difficult because we're discussing human beings, people with hopes and dreams who love their families and who simply want to live their lives. These are people whose lives were actually devastated by the Atlantic slave trade. Not only their lives, but their futures. Now, the lion's share of slave labor in the Americas was used to produce crops for enslavers who reaped those economic benefits. I have to admit that we had to rely heavily on digital online sources to come up with these estimates. Estimates of the values of products produced by slave labor. I'll include links in the episode notes for those who want to take a look at the sources. Cotton was one of the most significant commodities produced by enslaved labor in the United States. By the mid-19th century, the southern states produced vast quantities of cotton, primarily for export to textile mills in Britain and other parts of Europe. In 1860, the value of U.S. cotton exports alone amounted to approximately 191 million American dollars. Adjusting this figure for inflation and considering the scale of production over several decades, the cumulative value of cotton produced by slave labor during its peak years amounted to about 300 billion American dollars in today's currency. Sugar was another major crop produced by enslaved labor, primarily in the Caribbean and Brazil. The British Caribbean colonies alone produced significant quantities of sugar valued at about 3 million pounds annually in the late 18th century. Over a period of 2 centuries, the cumulative value of sugar produced by slaves can be estimated to approximately 140 billion American dollars in today's currency. Tobacco produced in the American colonies, particularly in Virginia and Maryland, was another profitable industry reliant on slave labor. In the 1770s, tobacco exports were worth about 1 million pounds annually. Over a similar period as sugar, the cumulative value of tobacco produced by slaves amounted to around $42 billion. Rice was a major crop in the southern United States, and particularly in South Carolina and Georgia. By the late 18th century, rice exports were valued at around 200,000 pounds annually. That's British pounds. Over 2 centuries, the cumulative value of rice produced by slaves is estimated to be approximately 8 billion American dollars. Coffee production in Brazil, the largest producer, was heavily reliant on slave labor. In the mid-19th century, Brazil was a dominant force in the global coffee market, with significant exports. The cumulative value of coffee produced by slaves over an approximately 150-year period is estimated at about 42 billion American dollars. When these estimates are combined, the total value of products produced by slave labor in the Americas, all of the Americas, amounts to approximately 532 billion American dollars, and that's in today's money. This figure represents the immense economic impact of slavery, where the wealth generated was built on the forced labor of millions of Africans. The economic contributions of slave-produced commodities were fundamental in the development of global trade and the accumulation of wealth in Europe and the Americas. However, this prosperity came at a devastating human cost, with millions enduring unimaginable suffering and exploitation. Again, I'll include links in the episode notes for those who wish to delve deeper into the sources and calculations behind these estimates. Understanding the economic dimensions of slavery is crucial to comprehending its lasting legacy and the ongoing disparities it has perpetuated in societies today.
But honestly, the number of European countries that are involved, like when you talk about this, you kind of course, the Americans, the British, but man, Portugal.
Yeah.
Portugal was a major player in this, like for over 150 years.
Yeah.
Like you can almost say that they wrote the book on it.
Yeah,
on
they
the
pretty
Atlantic
much
slave
did.
trade,
Yeah.
like taking enslaved people from Western Africa, bringing them over to South America, mostly South America and the Caribbean, and then coming back with goods. They wrote the book on that. They almost wrote the playbook, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, man.
It was a huge operation,
Yeah.
and it really makes you look at humans, the human being as a whole, man, because this has been going on for not even just because of the Atlantic slave trade, well before that as well,
Yeah.
So,
Yeah.
um, but specifically for Africans, you know, um, I believe they suffered the most for it,
Oh yeah,
Yeah.
definitely. And um we've kind of talked about this before, but the Europeans and the Americans didn't invent slavery, of course,
hmm
but I don't know, they kind of took it to a different level.
Yeah, the numbers went up. Like uh the Atlantic slave trade became big business. Like and the amount of slave ships that were about 35,000 that brought 12.5 million Africans to the Americas.
Mm,
And that was mainly because the British companies sort of got involved, and which led to other branches being involved, and thus the slavery boom was sort of born out of that,
yeah.
connecting to the British banks,
Mm,
who all of a sudden started to lend out money, and some of the things that these people would put up were mostly land. So the British secured some plantations in the Caribbean. I think it was Grenada, I believe,
mhm.
sugarcane plantations, just to keep for the lending of the money, and then everything's kind of spawned from that, you know?
Yeah, yeah. But the just talking about the countries involved though, uh like Portugal, UK, France, the Netherlands, Spain,
Yeah,
and Denmark. They were, and of course we know about the US,
yeah.
but the actual ships that were involved, like under their flag, the ships that flew under the flag, Portugal accounts for the lion's share
Mm,
of so when like honestly when you think about South America though, right? Um you think about, like, when I think about South America now, I'm thinking about people of color.
yeah.
And like it's such a North American mindset to think, oh, most of the black people involved in the slave trade came to North America, but that's not the case.
Yeah, it's not. Yeah.
Like honestly, South America was basically populated by the slave trade.
Yeah.
Like you mentioned the number of 12 million people, enslaved people, were brought over from Africa. About close to 4 million of those went to South America.
Wow, I did not know that. Yeah.
Yeah, yeah, it's crazy, man.
Yeah. So that in turn, I guess, caused the sugar boom, right?
Yeah,
which
yeah,
uh which which was also hugely, you don't really think about sort of the stereotypes that happen from the slave trade. I mean, a lot of stereotypes have happened, but mainly one that stood out to me was the consumption of tea in the British and sugar,
yes, yes,
combining, just because they're known for their tea time. So they
yeah,
were getting Indian teas that came over, combined that with the Caribbean sugar that was
yeah,
it became a big part of their life. So it became like sort of like a treat to just a regular staple in society.
yeah, yeah,
So uh, the American or the British sort of, that was their thing. So
yeah,
that's what really I found kind of crazy, which also led to more of the economic boom of the slave trade
yeah, yeah,
itself.
The transportation of goods such as sugar during the Atlantic slave trade was facilitated by the Triangle Trade Route. The Triangle Trade Route was a crucial trade network linking Europe, Africa, and the Americas, that's North and South America, through a triangular exchange of goods and enslaved individuals from the 16th century to the 19th century. This triangle trade system involved three primary routes: from Europe to Africa, from Africa to the Americas, again North and South America, and from the Americas back to Europe. So initially, European manufactured goods such as textiles, firearms, and alcohol were shipped to Africa. These items were exchanged for enslaved Africans who were captured and enslaved by African traders and local leaders. This stage of the journey is referred to as the outward passage. The next segment of the triangle trade, known as the infamous Middle Passage, entailed transporting enslaved Africans to the Americas from Africa. They were crammed into overcrowded and, of course, unsanitary ships, endured horrific conditions that resulted in a lot of deaths, many due to disease, malnutrition, and, of course, mistreatment. Upon arriving in the Americas, the enslaved Africans were sold to plantation owners to produce raw materials such as sugar, tobacco, cotton, etc. These products were then shipped back to Europe in what was known as the homeward passage, on the same ships that usually brought them to America. The economic impact of the triangle trade was profound, fueling the economies of Europe and the Americas with slave labor and raw materials. It contributed to the rapid growth of industries such as textiles and sugar refining in Europe and the United States. However, the humanitarian impact was devastating as millions of Africans were uprooted from their homes, families were torn apart, and the countless lives were lost in the brutal conditions of the Middle Passage under the harsh regime of slavery in the Americas. Culturally, the triangle trade facilitated the exchange of goods, crops, and ideas between continents, shaping the development of societies and economies on both sides of the Atlantic. Today, the triangle trade remains a stark reminder of the deep-rooted injustices of slavery and the lasting impact it had on the world.
Yeah, well, that that sugar, man, it's like it's the most popular drug.
Yeah, man, it's like crack.
I don't know, man.
Yeah, man,
That-
seriously.
yeah,
It's-
so that was a huge driver, man, between
Yeah.
like the Caribbean and South American sugar cane,
Mm-hmm.
and
Yeah.
then you got the cotton in the States. That was a huge, but the cotton in the States, that was a later player though. That happened mostly towards 1800.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
But
So
the sugar was the first one. You're right.
yeah.
Like from 1500s, it was like 200-300 years, right?
Yeah.
Where sugar was the major export, I guess
Yeah.
you could say.
Yeah.
Man.
And then sort of that led to sort of the perfect condition of cotton being able to be grown in the Americas,
Yeah.
in the southern states.
Mm.
And when that boom happened, you know, America became like America didn't even grow cotton
Yeah.
at
Yeah.
first until after the War of 1812. So
Mm.
with the boom of that and sort of the people being promised land, it was like this perfect thing that sort of happened where you had some Africans that were still enslaved, and they sort of became, the laborers. At first, they were using indigenous people, but
Mm.
indigenous people were always getting sick due to the European sicknesses that were coming over on these ships. So a lot of them died.
Yeah.
So they started to use the Africans, who were, of course, I guess, had more of an immunity. And that's how sort of the numbers shifted there from the indigenous people who were obviously on the land first to the Americans who were displaced over here,
Mhm.
So just filling the void with whoever was available after you took whatever you could take from them,
Yeah. Yeah. So the other aspect, the last aspect that we want to cover in this episode is the amount of money that was involved in the slave trade, and this is like just the actual trading of humans,
Mm-hmm.
not to mention the economic boon of their labors, uh, but the actual trading of humans was actually a huge business.
In an August 22nd, 1863 New York Times article discussing the American Civil War and its origins, the South's economic dependence on slavery is highlighted as a primary driving force. The article includes a subsection titled "The Market Price of Slaves," which details the varying prices of slaves across different areas of the South. The section concludes with the statement, "We understand that Negroes are still held at from $700 to $1,200 apiece." To put this in perspective, let's consider the conservative estimate of $700 per slave. If we apply this to the conservative estimate of 12 million Africans who were forcibly brought to the Americas during the Atlantic slave trade, we see the trade in actual human beings amounted to an estimated 8.4 billion in 1863 US dollars. This translates to roughly 208 billion US dollars in today's currency. These staggering figures clearly illustrate that greed was a significant motivator for the actions of enslavers. Understanding the economic scale of the Atlantic slave trade helps us grasp the full extent of its impact. It was not merely a series of isolated transactions, but a vast, interconnected system that generated immense wealth for many of the costs of unimaginable suffering for millions. The repercussions of this system are still felt today as the economic disparities and social injustices rooted in slavery continue to influence contemporary society. In reflecting on these numbers, it's crucial to remember that behind every dollar was a human life, a person torn from their homeland, subjected to inhumane conditions and stripped of their freedom and dignity. The $208 billion estimate, while shocking in its scale, represents only a fraction of the true costs of the Atlantic slave trade. A cost measured in human suffering, lost potential, and its enduring legacy.
I wanted to sort of bring that up just in that direction in the sense of, like, you talk about just the movement of people, how it was a big boom, was in the Americas around that time, the plantations were judged on how many slaves they had. That was the value of the land rather than it actually was actually producing. So to them, you know, for them to have the power control over these slaves was an important aspect of that, because it was a driver for even some of these basic landowners, men, to be able to sell their slaves and keep thriving and building businesses and relationships. So it was huge, just what came out of it, you know?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and like, again, I've said this before, but we kind of look at and judge the past through today's lens.
Yes.
And it's kind of gross and disgusting to think that the value of your property or the value of your business was based on the enslaved people that you had.
Yes. Yeah.
But that was the case, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
And in some degree, though, you know, you think about it, though, like, the value of a business today is sort of based on your workforce.
Mm-hmm.
I know that, you know, you're paying your employees, but this model of how we do things in a modern sense is almost modeled on the slave model.
Yeah. Yeah.
You know, like these people that are working for these corporations, they don't have ownership in these businesses, right?
Yeah.
They're working for, I know they're being paid, but this the model of how things work is still kind of based on that, man, when you think about it.
Yeah.
And especially big companies like Amazon,
Mm-hmm.
you know, they pay very little for a lot of their employees. And, you know, the working conditions aren't great.
Well, I mean, and
You
it's
know?
just sort of it's taken all shapes and forms, like from, you know, sex trafficking, you know, to child labor, you know, in different countries and in what they use. Like, the bottom line is always the dollar. to
Yeah.
keep these this booming business. And the sad part about this whole money situation was the simple fact, especially in regards to the British, when slavery was abolished, they it was a long process because they were trying to figure out how to compensate these landowners for what they
Yes.
lost.
Yeah.
So what is that saying right there? You know what I
Yeah.
mean? And in British pounds, it was at that particular time, it was 20 million. I think it was 20 million pounds that was paid out.
It I don't think when people think about the Atlantic slave trade, they don't understand the number of people involved, the number of companies involved, and the amount of money
Mm-hmm.
that was involved, right? It
Yeah,
was, and that, and I think you're right. The amount of money was the kind of sticking point.
yeah,
Like I'm sure there were a lot of people that were you know, in the back of their minds, the moral aspect of it was kind of a sticking point for them. But what solved that was the amount of money
yeah, yeah. It
involved.
endured. Yeah,
Yeah,
it endured regardless of all
yeah,
that. And
yeah, yeah.
then the sad effect, the people who had the power over the people wanted it even more. We
Mhm.
talk about sugar being the drug, so is power, so is money.
Yeah,
You know what I mean? So
yeah,
it was just a big perfect storm where the powerful became more powerful, and they saw how they could exploit and use other people to get it. You
yeah,
know, you
yeah,
know.
exactly. And the other thing is, like the interconnectedness of it, right? So you had the Southern slave owner, but you know, he didn't he didn't exist alone in his business. So he had to purchase resources.
Hmm.
So, there he purchased clothing for his group of slaves.
Yeah,
Who did he purchase the clothing from? From some other business.
yeah,
He
exactly.
he purchased food, most likely, for his group of slaves. Who did he purchase the food from, right?
Hmm.
Most likely some of the food was grown on their land, but there were some
Definitely.
things that he did not grow, that he
Yeah,
purchased,
yeah,
you
exactly.
know?
Yeah.
And so the interconnectedness, right? And then even from that, then you have the financing of that land. Where did
Hmm.
the money come from? It came from
Hmm.
a bank,
Yeah.
right? So
Hmm.
there's
Yeah.
it's interconnected, right?
Yeah.
And
The
and
the
and it,
insurance
the
on those,
insurance,
on your all your property, your
yeah,
land and your slaves. You know what I
yeah.
mean?
S-
Yeah.
So it's something that can't be pulled apart.
Yeah.
And when people say that North America was built on the backs of slave labor, that's what it's meant by, because
Hmm.
you can't say, okay, well, slavery was over here, but you know our business was over here. Eventually it all
It
links up.
merged.
It
Yeah.
merged. It's not directly involved,
Yeah.
but the money seeps out into other areas of the
Hmm.
economy, right? Like
Yeah.
an economy, it's interconnected. It's
Hmm.
not. It's You can't just say, okay, well, like if you even if you look at today, if you say, okay, well, uh, you know, the oil business stands alone over here. No,
Hmm.
it doesn't,
Yeah.
because the oil business leads to, okay, I have to transport my goods. So what do I do? I have to buy gas. So if the
Yeah.
oil business does a certain thing over here where it increases their prices, it affects me because I have to transport the goods.
Yeah. Yeah.
So same situation. Uh, you know, a northern company that produces I don't know, bed linens.
Hmm. Yeah.
Bed linens in the United States in the 1850s. Where do they get their cotton from?
Exactly. Yeah. Yeah.
You know what I
Yeah.
mean? They
Yeah.
they they might not employ, they might not have slaves in their business,
Yeah.
but they're getting cotton from a company that a plantation owner that had
Yeah.
slaves.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, even you can even go back to like even World War II, like how businesses were
Mm,
they were all fighting war against each other, but they were
yeah,
all goods were being transported back and forth, you know what
yeah,
I mean? And same difference, like the where it spreads out. You might not have been in support, but you're definitely taking the money, you know what I
yeah,
mean?
yeah,
Yeah,
exactly, man. So
yeah,
that's something that I don't think a lot of people get in their minds, how interconnected the slave trade was to the North American economy,
yeah.
their way of life.
Hmm.
People might have had moral outrage, but
Yeah,
they were benefiting from
yeah. They certainly
that.
were. Yeah.
Yeah,
There was always a question of, sort of that sort of era by a lot of people, but like you just finished saying, it endured, it stayed.
mm,
The more money that came in, the more it helped the whole economy.
yeah,
And unfortunately, out of it, were the blacks that were really displaced, not to mention the indigenous people who were, land taking from them. But that was the effect of what it was to us. And I don't think the people who benefited from slavery will never ever see that. And it doesn't
no,
make them good or bad people just because they might have had relatives or people involved. Some of those people were involved just because of the business, you know what
yeah.
I mean, aspect of it.
Breaking new ground, breaking new ground, breaking new ground, simple breaking new ground, breaking new ground.
You have been listening to Down Home. Subscribe wherever you listen to podcasts.
Breaking new ground, simple breaking new ground, breaking new ground, breaking new ground, yeah. On a high plateau, from the one down below to the future of the funk, getting lost in the flow. Contact with the spark magex. Now it's time to flex with the force from the soul, reaching all aspects, getting deep, no time to sleep. As you reach your next phase, laying it all on the line. New trails start to blaze. It's a fire inside, a brand new path, breaking down the sum to one. Feeling free, I just laugh with the joy.
The song, Breaking New Ground, from The Breakdown.
Like magic prescribed, only to see the perfect blend, like a diamond in the rough, ready to drop a perfect gem. It's time to shine so fine to see what you find. Revelation.